I discovered Queen Victoria when I was a student at Cambridge. I was reading history, and I was studying Queen Victoria and the media. And one of the things I had to do was to read her diaries. So I went to the university library and got down a volume of her diaries, and I was not really looking forward to it because I thought of Victoria as a kind of old lady in a bonnet, sour-faced old lady in a bonnet. So I was thinking, well, okay, I guess I've got to do it. And then I opened up the diaries, and there was, the entry for November the 3rd, 1839, written by Victoria when she was about 19, and so about the same age I was when I read it. And it's just after she's got engaged to Albert, and she says, "Oh, I've just been for a ride with my dearest Albert. He got very wet in the rain. He was wearing his white cashmere breeches with nothing on underneath." And I just thought, whoa, this is really not what I was expecting. Here's a kind of teenage girl with a kind of real spirit, and they're the teenage diaries of a girl who, is tempestuous, passionate, spirited, and very interested in men. And so from then on, I always had a kind of thing about Queen Victoria. I always felt she was rather misunderstood and rather misrepresented. And later on, much later on, when I was thinking about what I was going to write about next, I remember Queen Victoria. So I'm probably the only person I know who can say that what I did at, what I learned at university has really helped me in later life. I guess Victoria's always been a bit of a sort of touchstone for me because I would say in many ways she's the first woman to have it all, because she's like, a wife, she has a very happy marriage with Albert, she's got 9 children, and she's the most powerful woman in the world. So, in my life, I've been a working mother, I've been married, I've, all these things. So, although Victoria has had a bit more help than I did, I always look at her and think, well, anything's possible. I suppose the thing I really like about Victoria is that she's got a very, very strong sense of her own identity right from the very beginning. I mean, one of the things I really love about her is that at the age of 4, she tells her mother, her overbearing mother, that she's not going to talk German to her, she's going to talk English, and I think that's quite funny. And then later when she comes to the throne, or just before she comes to the throne, it's the first scene of my book actually. She's 15, she's very ill, she's got typhus, and she's lying in bed in a sort of a boarding house in Ramsgate where they've gone on holiday, and she's really at her weakest. She's sort of, they were worried she was going to die. And Sir John Conroy, who's her mother's sort of advisor, boyfriend, who knows what their relationship was, tries to get her to sign a document basically giving him power of, appointing him her private secretary and basically giving him power over her, which would continue when she became queen. And she refuses. And I think that shows incredible independence of spirit, to say no to a man who's, got power over you when you're only 15, I think is really tough. And so I'm really impressed by her sort of independence of spirit, because although she had this very sheltered and repressive upbringing, when she comes to the throne, she's not someone who's sort of clearly been, she's not she doesn't have Stockholm syndrome, she's not in love with her captors. She instantly, from the off, she's like, right, I'm out of the traps, I'm going to do things my way. And she even decides her own name, because as a child she was called Drina by her mom, short for Alexandrina, which was her first name. And when she comes to the throne, she says, no, I'm not interested in that, I'm going to call myself Victoria, which is her second name. They would go, Victoria? That's not a name. But it wasn't, but she made it a name, and not only did she make it a name, she made it the name that defines the age. So, what's not to like about that? I suppose one of the most attractive things about Victoria is, although she was the queen of, she became the Empress of India and she was the kind of queen of empire, I think one of the most interesting things about her is that she was absolutely colourblind. And, at a time when Britain was becoming, there were a lot of people, sort of talking about the white man's burden and having sort of colonial ideas. Victoria actually was very different. She there was a wonderful story about her. She was given a slave girl, a Nigerian slave girl, and she immediately freed her and brought her up and gave her a dowry and sort of set her up as an independent person and kept in touch with her all her life and was very fond of her. And then later on, there was Duleep Singh, who she was very fond of too. I mean, he'd been dispossessed by the British, but she brought him out at the British court. And then later, she had a long and very interesting relationship with Abdul Karim, who was her Indian servant. And the courtiers around her detested him, and I think part of the reason they didn't like him was purely racist, but she didn't have any of that. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about Victoria, is that she was, a very unconventional thinker for her time. And, some of her views we would find difficult now, but in terms of her, she liked people regardless of whether they were white, black or whatever. She was just, she saw the person, not the colour of their skin. Well, I think when you read Victoria's diaries, you can see that she is, before she meets Melbourne, she's quite lonely, and then suddenly she meets this man who is, she doesn't have a father. The only man in her life at that time was Sir John Conroy, who she loathed, and here is a charming, and he was famously charming, good-looking, cultivated, very easy to talk to. And this man comes into her life, and no wonder she was completely sort of taken up with him. And when you read her diaries, you can see that she is sort of besotted. And every page is Lord M says this, Lord M says that. Lord M doesn't like me to wear blue. Lord M doesn't like earrings. It's if you read between the lines, it's like the biggest teenage crush of all time. You've got to remember her diaries were censored after her death, and also. She knew that they might be read by people, so she's not going to write I want to snog him, but she there's no doubt when you read them what's going on. And I think he liked her because she was he'd had this very unhappy life. His marriage had gone terribly wrong. His son had died. He'd been in court the year before for having an affair with a Mrs. Norton, a criminal conversation with a Mrs. Norton, and I think he didn't really enjoy politics very much. He was bored of it, and then suddenly this young woman comes along who needs him, and I think it brings him back to life, actually. So it's a very touching relationship, I think. I think the people who want Victoria, to change history and go off with Melbourne, that's not what they really want, because actually the whole point about their relationship is that it can never be, and that's why it's such an intense thing, because we know this. I mean, even though you want it to happen, it wouldn't work. So I think you have to love Vic Bourne, but you have to know that Vic Burt has to happen.